Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. You see, that is one of the greatest advantages of this method of teaching, the flipped classroom. Students have complete control over when they will watch these instructional videos, be it morning, lunch break, or midnight. And teachers have complete control over where they shoot these videos. In my case, I happen to do it at home, the comfort of my home, or what drink they choose to drink. In my case, a boring cup of tea. My name is Chanaka Rabel. I'm a lecturer attached to the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine and Animal Science of the University of Peradeniya, Sri Lanka. I intend to go over the fundamentals of the flipped classroom with this instructional video. So what does the term flip, the English word, literal meaning of flip, means? It means to turn something over. The plane flipped over and exploded. Flipped over, turn upside down, invert, and exploded. So what do you think a flipped classroom means? Can you turn over a classroom upside down? Reverse gravitational forces or something? Let's watch. Not that complicated, trust me. Like everything else, teaching also evolved. We had the good old days of the chalk and talk, chalkboard, which evolved into transparency slides, and then the LCD projector, which is where we are currently, and then video lectures, and ultimately student-led discussions instead of the teacher-led discussions. So flipped classroom falls here, video lectures, and that is exactly what I'm doing. I'm teaching you how to do flipped classroom using a flipped classroom teaching method, an instructional video lecture. Right, so before we get into the meat and bones of the flipped classroom, let us look at some of the very basic principles. Now you and I know the traditional teaching method is where a teacher teaches or teacher lectures a group of students, and then the teacher might decide to give some homework for the students to do at home. So the first phase here happens at the classroom. The second phase takes place at home. It doesn't have to be home, it can be the library, but it's outside the classroom. Now, in contrast with a flipped classroom, this teaching method is flipped compared to a conventional lecture. So how is it flipped? Now, like I said, in the traditional model, the lecture takes place during inside the classroom, and homework takes place at home. But here, with the flipped classroom, the lecture takes place at home. See, with the current system, with the traditional conventional teaching, the lecture takes place at the classroom. But here, the lecture takes place at home, and that precedes the classroom activities which will follow the lecture. Right, see here, lecture, there are multiple students and homework is done individually. Here, with the flipped classroom, the lecture is learned individually, and the second phase is where there is a group activity. So lectures at home, homework in the classroom. This is the whole concept of the flip, of the inverted teaching model. Now let's get into a little bit more detail. So there are actually three phases of the flipped classroom model. The first phase is where the lecture we talked about, the student learning the material, or student is preparing for this material at home, right? This takes place at home before the classroom lecture happens. The second phase now takes place inside the class. These are students practice applying key concepts learned during the first phase, and this takes place inside a classroom. So first phase at home, student learns by himself by watching these instructional videos. Second phase, student seems to be taking part in a group activity, and this takes place in class. Third phase is again taking out of class, which might be home or the library, as I said earlier, and the student is checking their understanding or consolidating or extending their learning, right? So this is the concept of the flipped classroom. Initial learning at home, the homework in class, and then a third phase again at home, further consolidating or further expanding or extending their understanding, right? So these are the three phases of the flipped classroom. So what am I doing now here? I'm doing phase 1. This is an instructional video. This is phase 1, which is this. Hopefully you're either at home, on your bed comfortably, or at the library, watching these videos, learning about the fundamentals of flipped classroom. There are three phases, the phases that I talked about. I want to go into a little bit of detail, but I'm not going to go into a lot of detail purposely, because the idea of the flipped classroom is not to spoon feed you like in the traditional teaching method. It's to give you an overview or guidelines, and then for you to work on your own to expand that knowledge. And then during a phase 2, we will check your knowledge, and with group activities, etc., we will try to clarify any queries you had and to iron out any wrinkles you had in your knowledge about the flipped classroom. So I'm going to do a comparison of the conventional teaching versus the flipped classroom. Like I said earlier, I'm going to go through a little fast, deliberately, right? So with the traditional teaching, you may have an optional first phase before the lecture. Not everybody would do it, right? Only the good students like yourself would go into the trouble of looking into, okay, what are we going to learn tomorrow? Okay, let me read over some of the fundamentals, right? So it's an optional step that not everybody would do, and of course you're going to spend limited time on it. Now in contrast with the flipped classroom, this phase 1 is a major component, and it is a compulsory component. You have to do it. If you don't do it, you won't understand phase 2. You can't make use of phase 2. Okay, that is phase 1. And just to show you that this whole video thing doesn't need to be stressful, right? I'm going to take a break and I'm going to come back for phase 2. See you shortly. Welcome back. Just to prove to you that I took a break, I changed my shirt and I changed my beverage. Okay, we talked about phase 1. Let's move on to phase 2. Again, like I said earlier, I'm not going to go into a lot of details. I just want to go fast and let you do the digging in and learning the details. So the second phase is a major component in both the traditional teaching and the flipped classroom. However, the teaching method is pretty different here. It's direct instruction by the lecturer or the teacher to the classroom, whereas here there is no such traditional lecture. It's more of a group activity, no lectures. It may involve quizzes, discussions. Students can use this time to clarify questions they got during phase 1, and essentially this is a session of active learning, active participation by the students. In contrast, on the traditional teaching, it's all passive learning, one-way stream, teacher towards the students. Some students may ask questions, but by and large, it's a one-way avenue, right? But it's different on the flipped classroom. One important thing is, so with phase 2, it's usually limited to learning or developing hard skills, the core competencies. Whereas with the flipped classroom, during these group work sessions, like I said, there's active participation. So students have a chance to learn not only the hard skills, but also the soft skills, teamwork, communication, social skills, collaboration, etc., etc. Now, because this is limited to the hard skills and it's a one-way avenue, passive learning, so there is not a lot of opportunity for students to gain high levels of understanding. I'm sure you all are familiar with the Bloom's taxonomy. So with the old traditional kind of teaching, you only get to learn the lower levels of the Bloom's taxonomy, whereas with the flipped classroom, you can achieve a higher level of understanding, learning of the Bloom's taxonomy. If I may remind you what that is, the lower levels of learning are remembering and understanding, and then higher levels like apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. So those are the higher levels which are achieved during this phase 2 discussion. In the traditional model, in the lecture, you can only achieve these lower levels of the Bloom's taxonomy, but then the students could go home and refer textbooks, etc., to achieve these higher levels. So that is phase 2. Now we move on to the third phase of the flipped classroom. Typically on the traditional teaching, this is where the homework will be assigned by the teacher, and unfortunately some of the students may not even have understood the fundamentals by this phase, and they only start to understand those if they attempt at the homework during this phase, and they may not have a chance to clarify with the teacher again, which is a sad situation. In contrast with the flipped classroom, students already know the fundamentals, and not even the fundamentals, they even know some advanced stuff, hopefully, during the discussions of phase 2, and this phase 3 can be used to obtain even higher levels of the Bloom's taxonomy by instilling even higher levels of advanced material, by assigning an advanced assignment or some kind of an assessment. So this is a great opportunity to further students' understanding even more. Now you'll notice that the Bloom's taxonomy that I show here is slightly different to the previous one I talked about. But then, we can discuss that at class. Let's just skip that for now. just summary of the points that were discussed earlier. Phase 1, preparation at home. There might be a few quizzes to help further the understanding during phase 1 itself, and then phase 2 again, all these discussions, in-class discussions, which may involve quizzes and assignments, worksheets, and then phase 3 more exercises to, depending on the subject, it might involve real life hands-on problems to obtain higher levels of cognition. Similar comparison, when is, what's done where. So the student aspect is what we talked about. At home, the student watches the lecture or learns from the instructional video and prepares questions for the teacher to be raised during phase 2. And the student clarifies these queries he or she had, and then participates in active learning sessions. The teacher has to create the video, which might be tricky for some people, but none of this is rocket science. Very simple things that we can do, and which I'll talk about during class phase 2. And then the teacher creates the video lecture and shares with students. It might be via Google Classroom. It might be using some kind of LMS learning management interfaces. And during phase 2, the teacher has to facilitate the discussions. Teacher doesn't dictate, like in the case of traditional teaching. Teacher is merely a facilitator, allowing the discussions to go on and helping students clarify whatever points they wanted to clarify. Another slide. So in the traditional classroom, the lecture happens first and homework assigned during school, and then the student goes home and does the homework. Hopefully, with the flipped classroom, student learns from the instructional videos at home, or it might be an instructional video, or it might simply be a podcast without video, just audio. And then he might get a quiz or quick assessment to complete, and then then he goes to school the following day, and then takes part in these discussions, interactive sessions, and clarifies whatever problems he had, and he gets to interact with the teacher and his or her peers, and teacher can even offer one-on-one help, which can hardly happen with the traditional teaching method. So I've covered the major fundamentals of the flipped classroom. So I want you to go through these next few slides and come to class with answers for these points. Right? So first thing is, you can go through these and see if these are true or false. Right? So I'll help you with the first one. Asking students to self-learn broad topics. That is wrong. That is not what flipped classroom means. You can't just give a broad topic and ask, okay, children, read about the cardiovascular system by next Monday, and I'll ask you some questions. You cannot do that. That is not correct. Right? So I want you to go through all of these statements and state whether they are true or false before coming to class. And I also want you to think about this. Something that teachers are afraid of is, does these videos replace the teacher? If all these instructional videos are available, is the teacher even needed anymore? Right? So think about that. I removed the camera to show you that you don't have to have you don't have to display your face not everybody is comfortable. To tell you the truth, I'm not comfortable, speaking into the mic or the camera either. But I just did it because I had to, but you don't have to. So there is option to, record only your screen and remove your face. So that's what I'm doing now. Okay. So before you come to class tomorrow, I want you to list all the major features of the flipped classroom, whatever you gathered from this brief demonstration, and also list the major pros and cons of flipped classroom. There might be gaps, obviously, which we can hopefully fill and complete during class discussion. So I'm going to upload 2 exercises onto Google Classroom, and I want you to work on those after our discussion is over. One of them, exercise 1, I want you to do it while the discussion goes on during class, and the second one, for phase 3, and I expect you to upload them onto Google Classroom no later than 4 p.m. 11th of December, the day after the class. Okay, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this, and importantly, I hope you adopt the concept of flipped classroom, and you implement it in class whenever and wherever possible. Thank you very much, and all the best for the rest of the induction program.